This is As It Relates to Podcasting. I'm your host, Simona, and today we are joined by Kendall, and we are talking about community, building a community around your podcast and more. Kendall is the community manager at Riverside FM, which is why we are having this conversation today. If you haven't caught the last two episodes of our three-part series together, you really should because we talked about so many amazing things. But today we are talking about community. So welcome, Kendall. Thank you for joining me for this last episode.
Yeah, of course. And this is my favorite topic. So we are ending strong.
Saving the best for last.
Exactly.
I love that. Okay. I have to say and caveat this right at the beginning. Riverside FM is really great at community building, really great at listening to their audience, community, and so on. And I know that is what you do. And I know that
Yeah.
you are behind all of that. So why community management? I'm just curious.
Well, first of all, thank you so much. I really
Welcome.
appreciate hearing that. That really makes
Welcome.
my day.
Good.
So thank you.
You're welcome.
Why community management? I think that anybody who has ever met me would see that it's just like the perfect personality fit for me. Like I would
Yeah.
say community management just like really fit what I love to do.
Mm,
I love to talk with people. I love to connect with people. I love to have conversations and understand what they care about. So that was most important to me. But I will also say I did not even really know about community management until I had started working for Riverside. I mean, I had an idea, but I wasn't like Riverside had approached me about being a community manager. And it was
mm,
just a moment where things kind of just clicked into place. I'm like, what is this profession and why have I never gone into it before? It's
mhm.
perfect. So
Love
yeah,
that. I
yeah.
love that. I love that. So there's so many different things. And I say I love that, but I have to add to that a little bit too. We all have to work, right? We all have to work. We have to make money to like live in this society and so on and so on. But there's nothing better than actually enjoying what you do and
Yes.
feeling like valued for the work that you're doing. And when people can see your strengths and like see that within you, it's so nice to have that mirror, you know?
Yeah, and I also just like I'm somebody that really also thrives on feedback, and so to
Mm,
have this kind of like communication and engagement with so many people throughout the day and really see how I'm helping them, even if it's just sending them a help center article or pointing them in the right direction of something or appearing on their podcast, like it really just drives me. It fulfills me.
that is so good. I love that. Okay,
Yeah.
so we are here to talk about building a community, something Riverside FM has done really well. What would you say is, if you look at like the crux of community building, what is that composed of? What does that include?
The answer is going to change for every community that you're talking about.
Mm,
So I would say that then I would actually, the answer for me would be that the crux of community is building it towards the people that you want in your community. So I don't think that any communities should really look the same unless they're like really operating in very much the same space.
yeah.
I think that the crux of community is responding to what people actually want and
Mm.
need and delivering that to them in a way that they want to be a part of it.
Okay, that's really cool. So how at Riverside FM, how do you make people feel like they're part of something bigger?
I think that there are a few ways that we're doing that. The first is that we are like my most important thing about our community with Riverside is that we're a community of content creators and
Mm,
people want to share what they're thinking, what they're feeling. They're talkers, they're podcasters. But
yeah.
my most important thing is that I want people to feel like they're heard. So that's the
Mm,
first thing. And that's whether that's saying, hey, I have a feature request, or hey, this actually leads to my second thing. I want to learn something. So my two pillars of the Riverside community are making people feel heard and making people learn how to be stronger at this craft. That's kind of what we form everything around with Riverside. And if the people in the community are learning or if they're being heard, then we're doing it right.
I think that is really great. And so, as you were saying before, like it's going to change for every single community. So, would you recommend that people, if you're starting to build out a community and building it around your podcast, figuring out what those pillars look like for you? Like, how do you come up with that?
Yeah, so I will say that when I first started, I was like, okay, what are podcasters going to want? They want
Mm,
to network. And that's true, but only to an extent. Like people want to network because they want to either A, grow their podcast by being a
yeah.
guest on other podcasts, B, network because they want to learn from another person. Like I was in journalism before. And so when you are networking, it's because you want sources, like
Yeah.
there's always a reason. And so you have to dig deeper down into the reason.
Mm,
I like to compare it to like sometimes going to a party. It's like, okay, what are the people, if I'm planning a party, and the people that I want to come are those people like you're going to choose a venue based on the people that you want to come. Where do I
Mhm.
see these people hanging out? Is it going to be in the center of the city if it's something for suburban parents? Like, no, that's annoying for them. What kind of music do you want to have? What kind of DJ do you want to have? So like it's kind of structuring your party around what those people want. Then the natural next question is, how do you figure out what they want? And the only way to figure out what people want is through conversations.
Mhm.
So that can either be a one-sided conversation where they're commenting on your posts and you're learning more about what they love. It could be what you're seeing people like more. Like maybe your funnier posts are getting a lot more likes and a lot more engagement. Or it can be actually what we did with Riverside is we got on calls with users and I would ask them like, why did you get into this craft? Where do you want to go after this? Like, how do
Mhm.
you want to grow? What do you want to learn from this? What would help you? Like, what spaces do you actually hang out in right now? And what do you love about them? So I would say the best thing is to like actually speak with people if you're able to, and then
Mhm.
form your community around their answers. I feel that sometimes people form the community and then they'll speak to people,
Yeah.
and suddenly those two things are misaligned.
That is such a good point. And you also do this online, but you also do it in person as well.
Yeah.
Riverside will bring podcasters together in real life in different areas of the world for meetups. Do you think that those meetups could have existed without having the online community first?
I don't think so. And I will
Yeah.
say that's because I kind of got the idea for the meetups from the online community. Because
Mm,
when I was talking with people, a lot of the things like where that people were saying was that they're podcasting alone. So they're looking for online communities. I mean, Riverside's a remote recording platform. So it's not that surprising that people would be podcasting alone in their
yeah.
homes and not really have that community. So they're going online. But it kind of was born from this online idea that it's like, okay, but what if we can get these people together in person? Like, this is luckily, I'm leading a community of people that thrive on these kinds of connections.
Yeah.
And so, if we can facilitate that and make that happen from our standpoint as Riverside, it's not just good for the creators because they're able to make those connections. It's also great for Riverside because the more that you kind of get ingrained in this community, the more that you learn how to become a better podcaster, the more you're going
Hmm.
to keep on podcasting. So if I can relate this to podcasts,
Yeah.
I would say the more that I feel like on these online spaces that I am laughing more with people, that I will listen to a bunch of podcasts that kind of recap shows. So the more that I
Oh,
feel like I'm
fun.
part of a conversation that recaps these funny things that I also love, the more that I'm going to keep listening to it because I want to continue. Because not only do I now love the podcast, but I also love all these other people who are listening to it.
Exactly, exactly.
Yeah.
And I think that's why things like book talk, for example, has been
Mhm.
so massive because people create podcasts around books and stories and things that people have shared common interests in. And I think that goes into building community is so important. Like you need to know what is it that people are there for, but how do you make people feel like they're part of something bigger than what it is? Right? Not even bigger than what it is, but like bigger than, like they're integrated in something in a conversation. I feel like those are the best podcasts where you feel like you're listening and you feel like you're sitting on the couch with them and you're having
Yeah.
a conversation.
And even especially also like you're sitting there with other people who are
Yeah.
listening to it. So it's a solitary experience to be like listening to a podcast and listen to these other like the host and their guest. But there's also this experience of being able to know that these other people are listening to the same thing and reacting. Like we have a user who has a podcast about off-roading, like vehicles for off-roading. And like how else are you able to find all of these other people who love off-roading? Like
Yeah.
it's just finding these little niche communities that just they make your experience with things like off-roading even better, and you enjoy that more, and you know that there are all these people who love to do it too, and I'm going to keep listening to this podcast because that's where my people are.
Do you think every podcast can have a community?
I think so. I really think so. I think that the harder ones are with business podcasts, like people that are
Mm,
kind of channeling their business into like with their podcast, because I think that it's important that like
interesting.
yeah, I think that you're able to because you're able to create a community of your clients, but also being able to like expand beyond that, I think is just harder. I think that if you can do it and you're able to get people to join the community and then they're able to listen to your podcast, then I think it's a really great way to channel people into that. Here's what I mean.
Mm,
So for example, Riverside's community. If I made a community group called Podcasters on Riverside, that's going to create a community of podcasters who are already using Riverside.
Yeah.
And when they join, they'll join the Riverside group. But instead, we have our community called Conversation Creators by Riverside. It's about podcasters, and then it also is just by Riverside. So instead, what we have is that we have a group and a community of podcasters that are coming around podcasting, but it's facilitated by Riverside. So that's what I mean about like, try to, when it's your business, separate it a little bit from your business. So instead of saying people who go to this yoga studio, right? It could be yoga enthusiast by your studio. And that expands it a bit more into people that might not be using your studio, but now that they've seen all these amazing people that do, they want to join. Does that make
Exactly.
sense?
That makes perfect sense. Now, when you run a community and you create a community, obviously you get feedback that's good and, positive and negative. How do you handle the negatives and sort of not transform them, because you want to honor it for what it is, but how do you take those negative comments that you might receive and make sure that the user or the person who's on there still has a really good experience with the company, the brand, the product, all of the above?
I would say that being online is a source of like anonymity.
Yeah.
So I think that the more that you can remind them that you're a person and that there are real people behind this,
Yeah.
I think that's the best. So there are some ways that I'll handle this. So sometimes I'll just say, hey, do you want to get on a call? I'd love to, again, back to the pillar. I want to hear you. So people want to
Mm,
feel listened to. I want to hear you. But
hmm.
then I also want them to know that, like, to hear me. So there's sometimes an example is that what I really want to avoid with our community is I don't want it to be a support channel.
Yeah.
Like, no one wants to be a part of a community where everyone's on there being like, hey, my microphone isn't connecting. And so instead, what we do is we private message those people and say, hey, we need to get your account information. That's
Yeah.
important. And that is something that we don't want to share on a Facebook group with 17,000 people. But some
Mm,
people will get upset about the fact that we will decline that post and write to them, like to DM them, because they
yeah.
feel like it's some sort of censorship. I've always found that when I write to them and say, hey, I heard that you're upset with this. Let me tell you my reasoning why we're doing this. It's not because I want to censor you. It's because I actually think that this is going to be more valuable for you getting support and for everyone else in the group to not feel like they're in a live help chat.
Yeah.
And people get it. Like once I explain it, they'll understand it. So making sure to remind people that you're human and you have your reasons for doing things, but also to listen to them and respond. So maybe with that, I'll say, okay, let me rethink our policy to try to hit a happy medium. So responding, whether that's responding in the actions you do or actually having a conversation.
I love that. I think that's amazing. Is there anything else that you would say is really important to hit on when it comes to community? Anything that comes to mind that we haven't talked about?
I would say that a great thing that you can do when you're just starting your community is you can start the conversations. Like, don't be afraid to post in it every day and get people talking. Maybe you need to set the pace in the beginning, and
Mm,
then as it goes, let it go. You know, like you can still post every day if you want to, but don't expect to open a community. It's like having somebody again at a party and you want everyone to come in and just be the first person to make an announcement to the room. Like you kind of need to coax people into it in the beginning, and then as they feel more comfortable and they feel like it's their space, they'll continue to do that for you. So
I love that.
yeah, put in the legwork in the beginning.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point. I recently, maybe about like a month ago, I started a Facebook community because I know that people would get a lot of value from it, but I didn't have the capacity to put what I needed to put into it, and it's dead, but it'll revive. And I think that you can revive something once it's
For
started. Like
sure.
I think that it can be, but I think it takes a lot of intention to do that. It's like thinking
Exactly.
about what and why you're doing it instead of just doing something.
Exactly. Like you can go on cruise control after you've driven the car for a couple miles.
Exactly. I love that. Kendall, thank you so much for joining me for the last few episodes. I've loved our conversations. Can you tell my listener where they can find you and connect with you?
Yeah, of course. I've loved them too. This has been a lot of fun. And you can find me and continue the conversation over LinkedIn would be best. So Kendall Brightman on LinkedIn. And then speaking of community, our community group is Conversation Creators by Riverside.fm on Facebook. And you could also find us in the podcasting community on Discord. So we'll add some links
Amazing.
for that.
Amazing. Yep. I will have all of the links to that in the notes below for all three episodes. Thank you so much for all of this, for being here and for joining us.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. And I will see you on the podcast next week.